Once I get my cell phone on the floor. No, I want to get to talking. Hey, Gary, how should we do this to organize this, to get people to sit down? Let's start. Good evening. My name is Janine Debonnet.
Hi, Savannah. Whoa, nice to see you. Nice to see all of you. And wow, what a joy and what a treat to see all of you here back at the school. Am I really supposed to be starting, or is Jill speaking first?
Jill is not speaking. You are speaking.
I am. Okay. Gelsomina, Heather, all these wonderful people. So good to Larry, May. And while we're having fun, my colleague Paul Carey is giving a lecture in room 204. I waltzed in there with my martini. I don't know if the students thought it was quite a bit of fun. But okay, we better get on the road here. I didn't finish that martini because I knew I had to do this. So I'm going to introduce our panelists for this special event. Len Van Milne, in conversation with graduates of the school, the spirit of things past and the shape of things to come. I'll introduce the panelists from, I'll go from Terry to Mohammed. I'll go from one end to the other. So Terry Fuglin is a graduate from 1984, and she holds a B.Arch from Carleton's 5-year professional program and an M.Arch post-professional degree from McGill, where she produced a very beautiful thesis on the ornamental universe of William Blake. Terry practiced architecture in Ottawa, Montreal, and London in the UK. She's also been involved in a life of teaching architecture for many years, assigning penetrating problems to her students when she taught here at Carleton and then at Dalhousie, and currently at the University of Manitoba. Terry's research interests include the history of modern architecture, the relationship between form and materiality, and the effects of the global economy on local systems of trade and exchange. Terry's a wonderful designer, historian, and the most thoughtful voice in architectural pedagogy, and she loves this building. Sitting next to Terry is my classmate, Sybil McKenna. We graduated together, and I still remember well Sybil's flawless, off-centered, minimalist, rapidograph ink drawings. No one could do them like, well, maybe Heather, but no, Heather's were pencil, 4H. 6H, 4H, but Sybil's were ink anyway. We're going to come to, so Sybil McKenna is an architect and educator based in Montreal. The work of her firm, Sybil McKenna Architecte, draws on her diverse experiences in architecture, urban design, planning, landscape, heritage, and interiors, gained in offices in New York, Princeton, and Montreal. Throughout her career, and in tandem with her practice, Sybil has been a guest critic at schools of architecture across North America, and has had teaching appointments at McGill, Ohio State, the New School, and Carleton University. In addition to current architectural commissions, she teaches studio at McGill and is a member of the Planning Advisory Committee for the town of Montreal West, where she resides. Great to see you, Sybil. And moving on over, it's Chris Leggett. And Chris is from the early years, and don't be fooled by his youthful glow. B.Arch 1974. Chris Leggett, a Carleton University architecture graduate, so from the early years, has over 40 years of professional experience, most of which has been spent operating his own award-winning architectural practice here in the Ottawa area. His firm has multiple awards and been published many times including Canadian architect, where you'll see his fire station number 12, a very beautiful building in West Ottawa, and also published works in Rizzoli magazines. His firm won an Award of Merit for the legendary Mississauga City Hall competition as well. He's also an accomplished artist with work located across Canada and also in many other countries. And I point now to the fact that one of Chris's beautiful paintings is in our gallery for the silent auction. So don't forget to go take a look behind this wall, up the stairs, and you'll see Chris Leggett's painting, and maybe you'll be a lucky winner of that painting, or auction winner. Next is Savannah Alhaj. And Savannah, I had the great pleasure of working with Savannah when she was a thesis student here not so long ago. That thesis explored prefabricated housing to insert into existing residential fabrics, and it really was outstanding. Savannah's research continues to be in computational design and the use of advanced technologies to achieve complex geometry in prefabrication and fabrication systems. Savannah has attended interesting workshops with Design Morphine, and also spent a month in a design build program with the AA, the Architectural Association, at the Hook Park rural campus in southwest England, where she used traditional construction combined with advanced digital fabrication technologies. Savannah has worked in Toronto with Jakob Puschelberg and 2x4 Studios, and moved to Vancouver to work for Dialogue Design, and is now with Stantec, where she is an AIBC intern architect and designer. It's great to see you. Thanks for coming back. And finally, not finally, because I'll get to Glenn in a second, we have Mohammed Al-Rifai. And Mohammed is a graduate of both our B-Arch program in 01, sorry, the M-Arch, so no, the B, sorry about that, okay. And so 6 years after graduating from this school, Mohammed established an art practice using sound and installation as medium to explore place and form. He returned to the profession as an intern architect with Douglas Cardinal, where he had the opportunity to interface with Indigenous leaders on a number of cultural, educational, and institutional projects. For the past 8 years at Moriyama Teshima Architects, Mohammed has continued to pursue design excellence in the realization of thoughtful and influential spaces and buildings in Canada and on the global stage. Mohammed holds a B.Eng as well in industrial engineering from the American University in Cairo. And we're very excited to have you on our panel. Thank you, Mohammed, for being here. And last but not least is our panel moderator, Glenn Milne, who is the co-founder of the School of Architecture, and also, I think as a young person, someone who drove around the country or the province to collect insight and data to convince the province to open more schools of architecture. And Glenn, co-founder of the school, will briefly, he will be emceeing this event tonight. He studied architecture in Toronto and practiced architecture in Canada, England, Finland, and the USA before co-founding the School of Architecture in 1968, where he taught courses in architecture and public administration quarter time from 1970 to 1995. Clients for his ongoing design facilitation practice have included a prime minister, federal agencies, Indigenous governments, corporations, voluntary organizations, and senior military staff. Glenn is the author and publisher of an annually updated bestseller, Making Policy a Guide to How the Federal Government Works. Glenn is a very versatile and gifted thinker and maker, and I myself still remember my second year studio teacher and his beautiful and confident and smart, simple sketches in Design Studio. Glenn, thank you so much for taking this on, and with no further ado, let's have a panel on the spirit of things past and the shape of things to come.
So the setting is the middle 60s. I was teaching at NC State, came back to to Toronto for the summer because it was cooler, and then Raleigh, North Carolina. And got this idea over coffee with Roy Brown, who taught here briefly, when he said, I wonder what Dave are going to do about the expansion of architectural education, because the Premier has announced that he's going to expand post-secondary education. What they are going to do? Hey Roy, it's our turn. So I just up and got in the car and started driving around asking university presidents and their staff questions. And along the way, the OAA said, what are you doing? Okay, good. We'll support you doing that. And the Ontario ministry said, hey, what are you doing? Oh, good, we'll support you in that. So at the end of the summer, we had a kind of think tank at the OAA headquarters. Ron Tom, Jack Diamond, and other gods to come were there. And we came up with this idea that it might be good to have a system in the province where we had lots of undergraduate programs and a few master's programs, so as to spread architectural education around. The group really thought that architectural education in a city makes a big difference, and I would guesstimate that's the case in Ottawa. So along the way, I had a meeting, a run-in, an explosion with John Ruptash, the Dean of Engineering. And he's a good imitation of Jimmy Cagney. He was, at least. So he said, now I want to talk to you. You come to my office, I'm going to tell you about architecture and how it's going to go down at Carleton. I said, okay, well, yeah, that'd be nice, yeah. So I went down to his office, just over here in the engineering building, and he put his feet up on his desk, and he lit up a big cigar, and he yelled at me for about 20 minutes. None of this fooling around with studio and all that crap. We're going to turn out architects at this school that know what they're doing. They're going to get the good technical stuff. Of course, I was, a gentle 29, 30-year-old something or other, and I was quite dismayed by his presentation. So I said, do you have another one of those? He said, what do you mean? I said, the cigar. He said, oh, of course, I didn't tell me to smoke. So I lit up a cigar for the first time in my life, put my feet on his desk, and I yelled at him for 17 minutes. And I told him about the nature of architecture and studio and the creativity, et cetera, et cetera. And to his credit, he took it in, and it changed a few things. Well, there was a competition for the directorship of this new school. Of course I entered, of course I lost. Doug Shadbolt, who I revere. Doug has been noted as the architectural educator of the past century in Canada. He started at Nova Scotia Tech after teaching at McGill. He started this school. And what I want to tell you about Doug Shadbolt maybe is not self-evident. This building wouldn't be here, this program wouldn't be here, because Doug knew how to fight the battle up there in the Senate with the administration. He got this building from 37th on the university building priority list to number 1 in about a 15-month sprint. I was playing squash with the president's assistant, and he said, that guy Shadbolt looks like Father Christmas, but he's a mean son of a bitch. Well, I guess, cutthroat politics in academia is standard, isn't it? And Doug got us through that. He got our program, he got our budget, and he got this building. And I got one more word in. He said, well, I think we should get Ron Tom, and he started naming his cohort. And I said, well, what about Carmen Cornell? Because I'd seen a drawing in Carmen's 5th-year thesis where he had people dancing in an attic looking out a window at the moon. And it was the first time, I was at 3rd year at the time, that it occurred to me that buildings are about the human experience. And so Carmen brought that here. So the moment comes, the School of Architecture is about to open. We don't have any furniture, we don't have any space, but Dean Ruptash gives us a floor of one of those engineering buildings over there. And of course, it's a sealed room in the middle. They pulled the lab equipment out of, surrounded by a hallway, surrounded by a row of offices. And so Bill Cope, the other professor, and Doug and I were the founders. And Bill Cope was a crazy Svengali guy with a big black beard and ideas all the time. Oh, we can look at it this way. And he taught me how to flip ideas and think things through in charismatic and careful ways. Bill was an incredible asset. I was some sort of disciple of Lewis Kahn. What does it want to be? So we had a good chemistry. We came up with this idea. And the students came into the room. And how many of those people, not students anymore, were there in that room that first few minutes? These are the witnesses. So I ask the rest of you, what do you do in the first moments, the first minutes of a new institution? Do we welcome them and give them a lecture on the nature of architecture? Would that be a good idea? What would you do? Sure. And remember, these are people who've been in high school or perhaps other schools, and they're just accustomed to lectures. What did you say? Get drunk. It's getting warmer. It's getting closer. So, dance on a rooftop. Okay, you have to move. Larry?
Primal screen therapy.
Primal screen. Oh, did you know PST as well? Oh, that's very good. So they looked at us and they said, because we're leaning against a lab bench. And we're about 2 years older than them. And they looked at us and they said, are you the profs? No. Would you close those doors, please? So they closed the doors. And this is a room with no windows now. Flip the switch. Is my colleague ready? Please. The room went completely black. Tick, 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 tick. And a voice out there in the blackness that we would never identify said, what'd you do that for? And one of us, I can't remember if it was Bill or I, Bill's dead, so I'll say it was me. One of us said, what do you think? And the school was born. So we laid on the floor and leaned against the columns and felt the walls for over 2 hours. And the average guess when we turned the lights on as to how long we'd been in there was 4. And we dreamed and we told about why we were there, and we had no idea whose voice was whose, professors or students or whatever, including one student who said, this is a lot of lefty nonsense. And some folks, said, well, wait a minute. And somebody said, I can feel this room better than I can see it, etc. And when we turned the bright lights on, dare I say, those of us who were there that first day, 50 years later, we are still friends and better than that. Eve, is that true? So the school was born in friendship, I dare say passionate friendship, creativity, and helping all of us, I think I graduated from the school too a few years later, become richer and more creative and self-directed. One of the first things we did, by the way, is I went around and I bought the word supposed to. It cost me $50. Of course, then I was met with a horde of students saying, I want, you know, what are you supposed to do now to get that? No, somebody who's been sold. Somebody else got the money. So we took away the SPOSTAs and went to the HAFTAs, and later on, perhaps we'll hear from the folks who were there what really happened. Wow. So that's how we started the School of Architecture. And what we'll do is have the panel chip in for 5 each. And I'm sorry, my story was supposed to be 5 minutes. I think we're 11 and a half, so that's bad. Chris, are you first up?
Yeah, I'm first up. Is this working? Yeah, good. Well, I didn't get to experience that because I was in engineering, which was not my fault. I applied late to Carleton, and they told me it was too late, and if you want to get into architecture, I'd have to spend a year in hell, which is what engineering is, and I did that. The proviso was that I would take a course with Bill and Glenn, and that's what I did, and yikes, engineering, I gotta say. 8 math courses and a remedial English course, that was it. And what a relief when I managed to crawl out of there. So it's been fun. I mean, this place is, it's the first time that education was fun. High school wasn't fun, and engineering wasn't fun. So it was incredible because it was one of these places that said, you know, your memory is not more important than your intuition. Your ability to just, spew things is not as important as what you feel about things. And we started doing things with our hands. I'd always done that, but nobody in school had ever thought that that was significant. And so this education here has been incredible. Where do you get an education where you are asked to stand up in front of your peers every term, 2 or 3 times, and explain yourself? But I mean, that happens with PhDs, but it doesn't happen pretty much anywhere else. And then, for people to kind of go like, what on earth do you think you're doing? Like, what is that? And it was incredible. I mean, it's scary, it was brutal, but mostly fun and sometimes exhilarating when somebody all of a sudden saw what you were trying to do and rewarded you and told you what a good thing you had done. So, the student thing too, I mean, Glenn mentioned it, but the whole camaraderie thing was pretty incredible. And it's because what you did is you kind of left the normal planet Earth with your comrades. And then when you went back to your apartment or whatever, your normal friends, you couldn't really relate to them anymore because you weren't there very much. They'd talk about their 5 bird courses and how little they had to do. And you would be there building all night long things. And then you started actually talking, like with some strange vocabulary, which again kind of alienated them a little bit. So there was no other way other than to bond with all those people around you. And the bonds are still there, and they're all across distance and space, and it's so incredibly neat to see some of those faces again tonight, like Brian Lang, who came all the way from Vancouver, so I could see his face. Thank you, Brian. But I had some thoughts about the future, and I think we've got some serious issues coming up. So I'm going to narrow it down to a couple of things. Civics. What is civics? Civics is where we, as people, as professionals, exist in society, and I'm not sure that us as architects is doing enough to let people know all the things and the values that we bring to a community meeting or just communities in general. When I did a little bit of research, and that's something architects do a little more as research. So I spoke to some people, I asked some questions, and there are no architects, or very few, I just found out one tonight, a colleague of mine, as politicians. Now, who wants to be a politician? Who wants to be an engineer? But politicians, bureaucrats, that side of it really does direct policy. And if we ignore them, if we think we're, too above that, then we lose out. and I think it was Obama's complacency is what got us to where we are right now with some of our politics. And then, you know, we have a responsibility. When a developer does his building, and say like he's in a zone with a 30-story zoning, and he applies and gets a 65-story building. There's an architect there, someone doing those drawings, but who's the architect representing the person who's going to live on the 55th floor with their children? We should be there somehow. We should have an opinion on what's going on there. The city gave away 35 stories and didn't ask for anything back. And that's because we're not there at the table with the people who are making those decisions, and we're not influencing them. We need to be closer to that table. We've also lost some ground. We used to, you'd see reviews in the paper. There'd be the Ottawa Citizen and an architectural critic. There doesn't seem to be anybody doing architectural criticism on a reporter kind of basis. They still do film reviews. Somehow films, catch more attention than a 65-story building going on. I'm not sure why that is. And a lot of what goes on in civics it has to do with the way that our systems are set up, and it's really worth trying to figure that out. We have 23 municipal councillors. 9 of those are inner city councillors. The rest, whatever that is, 14, math was never that I learned, are suburban councillors. So every time a project that comes in, like can we put an extra 35 stories on a building, it gets voted down by the suburban councillors. Because the suburban councillors have constituents that really don't give a damn about what's happening downtown. But what they really do want is an increased tax base. And so, time and time again, inner city issues are voted down just through apparent democracy. And then there's the business side of things. I think that's another side that we are not paying enough attention to. Architecture is a business, and if you don't understand the business concepts of it, you're not going to be doing it for very long. But we're being taken over. Again, we're not explaining ourselves. We're not taking this great story that we have here and explaining it to clients very well. In the process of this, I spoke to a senior bureaucrat at the City of Ottawa, and he mentioned that architects are not really answering the RFPs very well. They're not giving the right vocabulary for what these people want, and so what's also happening is that the top of construction and management, design and management, whatever you call it at City Hall, used to have an architect or senior architect up there. There isn't those positions anymore. They're being given away to management educated people with MBAs. So again, we are losing our foothold because we're being taken over by management companies. And again, if you look at some major projects that are going on in the city right now, there's no architect lead. I asked the councillor who is up for election right now, who was the architect on that pedestrian footbridge going across the canal. He couldn't tell me. But what he did tell me, he said, well, we looked at the design and there was all these sort of curved walks and things, and anyway, we had a panel of 3 engineers look at it, and they straightened it out. Because the council said, those curving, those funny walkways, they wouldn't have worked. And you kind of, like the councillor is that naive that he would actually think that, but then again, there's the pedestrian footbridge across the Aviation Parkway, and which got designed 3 or 4 times and was an embarrassment to the city. So the city likes to take on big, huge corporations. The main company in charge of that bridge design was M&M corporate something and something. But when I went to the website to see if I could find out some information about it, they had been taken over by THM, corporate something or other. And the city loves that, because bureaucrats like to cover their rear ends, and the bigger the company, the less they're exposed. So I think my time must be up, yeah. What I want to just finish off by saying that, could somebody answer that phone? Is that, when I heard what's going on in this hole out here, it's the business school. And it kind of strikes me that, what a great opportunity. MBA programs are looking for people to co-join with because they're plateauing. And this would be a great opportunity to find a project to join an MBA program. So thank you, sorry.
We're running the sequence here in terms of graduation dates. I think, Terry, you're next.
Yeah, I'm 1984. An auspicious year. Chris, that was beautifully said. I wish I could have heard it all. And I hope what I'm going to say will complement your wonderful words. So thank you. I'm Terry Figlum, alumna, former teacher at the School of Architecture. Thank you so much for inviting me to this debate. I am deeply honored. And please note that I had a fabulous education here, and I care deeply about this school. I would like to pick up on the keywords in the debate title, spirit and shape. As an alumna of this school since 1979, and as a teacher in the architectural discipline since 1992, I would like to address the future trajectory of architectural education. Over my teaching career, I have become more and more concerned about what I would call creeping corporatism. This kind of follows up on what you're saying. The creep of corporatism into all domains of education. I teach at a university, and I think I'm being filmed, so I will say an important person at the university holds a degree of information technology and also worked in the banking sector. At our university, we have subsequently suffered the interference of IT programs in almost all the activities we do, from booking rooms to claiming expenses. These systems do not make our lives easier, they are tedious and cumbersome. Moreover, there is a sense of being tracked and watched. Outside of the corporate creep into the administrative side of education, however, we can see its influence in the very shape of education itself. I am deeply concerned over the increasing over-specialization of degrees and programs in what has always been a generalist discipline. More and more, secondary education risks becoming a training ground whilst losing its disciplinary roots. More and more students are considered to be clients or consumers of education. We can look at the country south of us, Betsy DeVos, to see how far this could go in the public school sector. At the same time, we see the corporatization of the professions and the eventual devaluation of their profound missions. The professions, architecture, medicine, engineering, perhaps law, whether wittingly or not, are being reduced to the technocratic goals of the corporate state. The neoliberal, corporatist world that the president to the south of us is promoting, the professions, their values, and their expertise are being devalued. This comes at a time when we most need good leadership. Leadership based on sound knowledge and values. Not to sound alarmist, but to sound alarmist. It is very possible that we are in the twilight of the human era, that we are on the cusp of a profound change that might be so dangerous beyond anything we have known in human history that we need to wake out of our delirium. For example, on a personal level, I am deeply alarmed to learn that 70% of all insects by volume have disappeared off the face of the earth. I am deeply alarmed that our landfills are growing exponentially full of disused and discarded building components. I'm alarmed that climate change is advancing far more quickly than scientists anticipated, and more species are endangered and disappearing forever. And yet, we live in a time of rampant consumption that is accelerating while prices fall. Clothing, flying, food, etc. Something's not making sense. So as the current world portends a future of rabid populism and incipient fascism, architects and educators cannot afford to abdicate our roles as leaders. As educators, we teach skills and we mentor creativity in design, but most importantly, we are a critical part of the socialization of our students and society in the most profound sense. And as architects, we socialize in a different way. We shape through the physical realm the daily routines of our society. It is time for architects and educators to promote serious, humble reflection on the work we need to do in the immediate years. We need to reconsider how architecture shapes our everyday rituals and routines and the impacts of small habits in aggregate on society and the environment. We need to know and consider how to apportion the very scarce physical resources of the world to accommodate both human life and all life forms. Whereas architecture appears to be a materialist discipline, it can lead us away from materialism and consumption towards a renewed relationship with nature and with each other. This building, built by Carmen Corneille and Ewing Corneille, taught me this. It taught me about relationships. This should be the spirit and shape of architectural education to come. And in closing, I would like to point out a small book published by a historian of the 20th century who felt compelled to write a manual on how to avoid fascism and tyranny in our own time. The author is Timothy Snyder. He's an expert on 20th century history, particularly in Europe. And the book he teaches at Yale University, and the book is titled On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. I am reading this with my students, even though it's not specific to architectural discussion. And I would like to point out two chapters especially relevant to this debate. Number 2, he exhorts us to defend our institutions. To defend our institutions. We need to defend what we are doing in architecture schools because it may not last forever. Don't take this education that Chris has described for granted. And chapter number 5 is remember professional ethics.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Sybil, are you in for a role?
That is, I'm still trying to take that in. But it is interesting, you know, that I have to say that many of your deep concerns are also ones that I share. Perhaps I can't express them as eloquently. However, I think that the comments that I wanted to make, they play in and out of this as well. I recently returned from 2 glorious weeks in Greece, which was the first time I'd been away for any length of time in about 7 years, and this is the reality of practicing architecture and wanting to be involved in architectural education and wanting to be a participant in the public sphere, the decision-making that goes on in our municipalities on a very direct level. It's a choice I made, but it was really good to be on vacation. And as a result, when I came back and I had to write this up very quickly, my head was going in all kinds of directions. So my apologies for being rather sporadic in my comments. The theme that I was working with from the last email I got was retrospective and prospective observations and ideas on architectural education and architecture in society. I would like to subtitle my discussion, and it gets to it at the end, in memory of slower architecture. I, like all of you, understand that we've gone through incredible changes, even within my 30 years from the date of graduation. Our profession and the education that goes towards granting a professional degree has really gone through a phase shift, largely driven by technology and the associated demand for accountability, as well as measurable returns and increased competition, which, as Terry was mentioning, has led to this sort of the business of architecture is like the business of business, it's like the business of education. This is part of our world now, and unfortunately, when many of us commenced our architectural careers, it wasn't so present. Perhaps it was there in the background, but it wasn't the goal. So I look at our school today, and I'm fortunate that I've had the opportunity to drop in on the School of Architecture here at Carleton every couple of years, whether to teach a studio or to be at undergraduate reviews or graduate reviews, thesis reviews. It's been fantastic, but it has given me a particular perspective on how things have changed here as well. At the same time, I think that we can all acknowledge that our digital world has reconfigured in many ways how our personal world exists and how we interface with that world, namely the rise of architecture and design as being something that is known about. Some of my friends and I from my year, we used to joke how, when we were in first year and second year, we all wanted to dress in black. And you couldn't find a pair of black jeans in Ottawa. So we had to go to Toronto to buy a pair of black jeans, or Montreal. And now, any cool kid that wants to be a designer has within their grasp a multitude of opportunities. They can look a certain way, they can act a certain way, they can talk, they can read magazines that are about design, that are about architecture. It's global. That's a whole different discussion, but I just wanted to throw that out there, that our world and the way that people, I do believe, I live in Montreal, architecture, design, what's being built, what's not being built is constantly in the public forum. It's part of the local media. And it doesn't matter if it's which media it is, because we all know that there are different kinds of journals, there's different kinds of papers and such. So, what I'd most like to talk about right now, though, is how this idea of technology has influenced the way that we draw, and how not only the way we draw, but how we represent architecture, buildings, and how in offices, what I have experienced is that drawing is not as present anymore. When the power goes down because they're building a new multi-story tower next to where your office is, and there's no power, everybody sits there. And they sit there and they just wait for something to happen. And it's back on it, okay, we can start doing our thing again. Like, nobody would think to pull up a roll of trace or just like a sketch, or to talk. We design through conversations as well, and we can explore our projects, we can problem solve in these ways. But for some reason, our brains have been reset to think only in a certain way. In terms of architectural representation, I am I will just say that it has developed a life of its own, and they're becoming more and more photorealistic, which is fine. Photorealistic images are sometimes what you need in order to secure a client's trust in what you're proposing. However, when they become the norm, when the image is before the idea of the building, where it is just a representation, and sometimes these representations are now supplanting the actual photography of the building. So we have a bit of it's a moral conundrum, I believe, because do we let a representation of the building take the place of the thing that's one step closer to the building? So it's again, we're considering what we have to work with and what our situation here is as architects, and how are we going to respond to this? I was reminded of a quote by a former professor of mine, not here, but when I was at graduate school in the States. And his name was Michael Graves, and believe it or not, modern, contemporary, wacky, Jimmy Nash, 6-0 pen drive. Michael and I we had a meeting of the minds, and I ended up working for him for a few years. But he believed in drawing, and he had this wonderful little quote, which was, it's as if architects are now drawing pictures of drawings rather than drawing or making pictures of buildings rather than drawing buildings. And it was something that really made you step back and think. And what is it that we do? Are we just representing things, or are we using drawing to, and whatever that drawing is, it could be a digital drawing. It could be a hand drawing. It could be tearing up paper. It could be, making a model. It is, how are we representing architecture, and how do we understand this in relation to what we're doing? In schools, I have seen the shift away from using drawings. However, just looking at this in our pit here today, it's so heartwarming, because I can see how drawing in all of its forms is being researched. It's being used to explore ideas. And really, this is one of the things that we're so fortunate to learn here, is how to explore ideas, how to think through things with our hands, not only our minds, but our hands. So I appreciate very much that it's occurring here in this school. McGill needs some help with that. So I think it's one of these questions we have to ask, the idea of representation in terms of what is going to be setting us apart at moving forward, what is going to be setting us apart from the mere technique of architecture, the mere production, being the person who facilitates the production of a building. What is an architect? The AIA a couple of years ago started this huge program, and honestly it's a marketing program, but the question was, why an architect? And it was this national program, American Institute of Architects, for encouraging the profession, members of the profession, to take part in this desire and program to understand why you are valuable. What is it about an architect that is valuable to a plan, a master plan, to producing a building, to deciding on renovations, to many different things. But it is the question that needs to be asked. What makes us different than a computer, right?
Thank you, Sue.
I just want one thing. So, my classmates and I were really fortunate to attend a school of architecture that gave priority to creative thinking and problem solving. founded in research, analysis, and the understanding of place, as well as the traditions of architecture. This was explored in the studio and in seminars. They were the heart of the program, and I was glad to hear that they were one of the founding ideas of the program as well. Our design tools were low-tech, hand drawings and models, readings, research, analysis, film. Our projects were subject to easy ruin with late-night ink and X-Acto knife disasters. However, these were the means we had for exploring the problems, and our output was decidedly low-tech, not photographic, not slick. The most sophisticated piece of equipment we had, I believe, was the black and white photocopier in the Unicenter, and the rapidograph. But this is how we communicated, this is how we problem solved, and the work was extremely expressive and extremely creative, and has actually been the foundation for the work of architects that practice in Canada and the US and in Europe that came from our class, and they're doing amazing projects. And I'm so proud to see the result of that very simplified way of doing things, that it works, right? So I go back to my idea about slowness and slow food, but slowness in architecture is actually, I believe, a very good thing. And it gives us time to reflect upon what we're doing, and it sort of engenders mistake making and the need to do things again, to repeat, and in repeating we sometimes tweak things a little, we think about it differently, but it's that time. So myself, when I'm caught up in manufactured and real urgencies of my practice, I often stop and reflect upon this idea of slowness, and to step back and consider what it is that I am making, why I'm doing it, and what it all means.
I had a meeting recently do a lot of work on developing design abilities, and the science of there points to the fact that there has to be an external expression that you produce and listen to and work back to. There, between parts of the brain and that product in front of you, through your hand, that does good things for the design and it does great things for your brain. So you are, as far as I'm concerned, no, you are absolutely on the right track. Mohammed.
Well, I'm actually going to try to draw from everything that's come, and I think I hope you're starting to see a pattern, kind of really emerging of the eras that everyone has been through and the influences that shape people. And drawing from Sybil's kind of notion of slowness, I guess I'll really start by talking about oscillation, and a means to find this steadiness by oscillating between extremes of things and really to find a stable ground. So the search for kind of form, the search for meaning, needs this oscillation. We need to be questioning. And I think that's one thing that we had this ability to be critical at school, and actually it was expected of us to be critical, sometimes to an extreme perhaps. And again, back to your point about the tools that we have, amazing tools, fantastic ability to articulate, express, and create and envision that things we could just dream of, not just on paper, but actually in building form. But to go back and to say, well, what does it mean? Why are we doing this? How do we be critical? How do we make sure that we actually are doing these things for a reason? Whether it's kind of really to stand up to our beliefs, the institutions, the nature that surrounds us, and our role in society. I mean, I think of where I come from, and I come from a civilization that has collapsed multiple times. And so I look around me, and wherever I look, I know that what I see is impermanent. It will collapse. What you see will collapse. What's important is what remains. So what are we doing as architects 500 years from now? What will our work look like 500 years from now? When you draw something, when you think about it, just pause and say, everything around me, maybe except this building will be up. will, but a lot of other things will collapse. They'll collapse because they're not made well, they're not thought of to last 500 years. They'll also collapse because people don't love you. And so, at the end of the day, you have to be in touch with people. You have to be a fighter, and you have to fight for what you love, your passion, your design. But you have to actually work with people, and you have to get people to also fight with you. And so it doesn't become a war, it actually becomes more about actually bringing everyone on board with you. So architects are leaders, we're like Noah, and we bring everyone. And our profession needs to be inclusive in many ways where we need the nuts and bolts person. We need the person who doesn't care about anything except making skins. We need the person who doesn't care about anything except making these tables work. That's really part, we have to kind of really learn how to be inclusive in bringing everyone on board towards kind of a common vision of how architecture touches people and how architecture is meant to last in a certain way. But on that note, I think of actually, again, thinking of the past, one of the things that I think inspired me about actually becoming an architect after being an engineer was reading about Frank Lloyd Wright, reading about how he implemented some of his buildings. He would show up, he would have like 12 drawings, 8 drawings, he would show up and these incredible pieces of work that still live and are still, more importantly, maintained. So people love the work. So I think architects should think about that. Think of the complexity that we put ourselves in. Is it all good? Maybe not. How do we go back? How can you create, how do you bring people on board so we can create these incredible, lasting, enduring moments, but by bringing everyone on board and being inclusive, so we spend less time fighting about our ideas and more time actually implementing them and actually sharing them. So there's, I think, moving, I'm saddened a bit to see that there's not a lot of students around here. Maybe everyone's busy working, which is I guess good. But I think as far as a kind of a message for students, all I would have to say is, learn from the spirit of rebellion. Learn from really, as an architect, we have to oscillate between 2 points. We have to oscillate between being, I guess, a generalist, someone who to be a leader, you need to bring everyone on board. You need to be able to relate and empathize with all points of view, to be able to create this common vision. That's what we need to do. But also to be passionate about what you do and to be so, to really immerse yourself in what you believe and in your principles, and to really be a rebel fighter, break a lot of things. And so we have to oscillate between this all the time. You sit in meetings, you have to, you have to inspire, you have to bring everyone on board with you. But at the same time, you have to be a fighter. You have to really fight for the things that matter. So I guess I'll leave at that kind of thought of oscillating and really finding a stability through movement.
I'm 83 in a month, and so I'm thinking about some conclusions. And I conclude that what we put our students through, which at times is contradictory and leads to terrible tension and stress, but I think of the fact that we actually attract the cream of society. As far as I'm concerned, the only other discipline that comes close to getting our kind of brains, the people who are in this room and up there, is maybe maths and physics. But, we are working with, I think, the best brains in society. Savannah, as one of the best brains in society.
But thank you. So I feel like my perspective of what is the future of architecture would be a little bit different, but yet relate to all the ideas that has been reflected in this panel. But I'm going to start with when I first finished architecture and I was facing a job. What was it that I felt? So I've always been a designer that was in the notion of making and drawing. So I felt like I understood the theories of what architecture is, but I really did not understand how is it made. So the idea of making. So I started, while I was working, I started searching a lot and going to workshops. And I'm going to speak about my 5 weeks that I stayed in the AA Design and Make in Dorset in England, countryside. So it's this segregated 30 hectares of land that is owned by the AA. And basically they own all this incredible technology that architecture is exposed to, from robotic arms to CNC machines to 3D printing to the regular old-fashioned huge wood shop that we have one of here. So what the students do is they start their program by designing, drawing, making very weird things, so the idea of creativity is still maintained. But then after 3 periods of designing and making like little weird creatures, I would say, there's a moment of kind of like documenting most of the work and project managing and establishing an idea of how would something like this be fabricated from the material within the forest, within the 30 hectares of land that are owned in Hope Park. So my exposure was basically coming up with all these like little weird drawings and trying to find a way to document it and make it buildable, and also taking a log of wood and making sure that you're like making material that could be buildable of. So I would say that the most important thing for young architects is the notion of making. That you're getting your hands dirty. You're still using technology and computational design and renderings and all of these programs to allow you to come up with your ideas. But I think getting your hands dirty and understanding how what you're drawing by hand can be reflected into a one-to-one scale model or something that is realistic, that is made like that could be buildable or made, understanding the notion of the material. So that's pretty much what I would end my speech with.
As you were speaking about making, I remember Gulzar Hyder, who was our director for a while, catching me just an offhand line and said, architecture, good architecture is thoughtful making. And I never left that. I also think it's playful making, of course. Thank you very much, panel. Who's got a word? I'm looking for your word. Your comment. You're looking bright-eyed.
Can't shut me up. Chris, your comments hit home. The failure of public appreciation of architecture, a failure for city architects, architects in politics, architects in leadership roles is bang on. And a big part of that is that we've let our membership slide. Only 20% of architects in Canada are members of the REIC. They don't have the funding to do all the things that we should expect and would expect of society through a national advocacy organization. Too few of us are members because too few of us can be bothered. Too few of us feel that $350 a year is worth membership in a national organization. And for many people, they say they can't afford it because we're quick to stab each other in the back for a cheaper fee. And it's absolutely true. And I'm part of a small committee that's working on developing a national policy on architecture for Canadians, similar to the Northern European policies. We have to advance this because otherwise our profession is going to become ever more marginalized will be the last man standing with the least, or last woman standing with the least responsibility, and have nothing to show for it. So we have to make this change, and the number one way to do that is to join organizations and raise a voice together and support advocacy, support policy, support architects in politics, support architects who are doing amazing things for the regulatory or advocacy councils and organizations. We have to support these organizations. I blew my brains out and nearly lost my business with the OAA because of the commitment that's involved. And nobody else runs for elections. Nobody runs for councils. Nobody runs for seats. We all figure someone else will do it. We all have to step up, and we all have to take that stand.
Here, here.
You were thinking, I saw you. Would you please share a couple of thoughts?
Why do you do that?
Come on.
Well, it is interesting. I mean, there is kind of a role because one thing that struck me is Christus Savannah. There's kind of an evolution from Christus Savannah, and what struck me is that the things that are so pressing to Chris, I don't see them. They didn't resonate with you, Savannah, I think, in the same way. So I'm kind of curious about that. The other thing that I was interested in very much was the notion of drawing, because like when we went to school, drawing was very, very important. It was, design was drawing to some extent, and Savannah, I'll put you on the spot again. Like honestly, the people that are coming into our office now, they cannot draw. And to me, it's kind of hard to understand when you see these kind of like gnarly scribbles that are kind of like a 4-year-old did it, and that's someone trying to explain to an idea, and I can't get my head around that, but I'm prepared to accept that that was the way that's the way my brain's wired, because that's the way I started, but I'm not sure if it's necessarily, I'm prepared to accept that it's outmoded in some weird way, and that there might be other ways of engaging with things. I mean, one thing that we find hard in the office is to get people to make little physical study models, because they all want to just model it and people look at it on the screen, but there is something fundamentally different about looking at through this box compared to being present with this object.
That's so clear. Looking through this box as opposed to being present with the product. Joe,
Heather.
you live in the nice world of academia and practice. I think Heather would be good at these schools.
Actually, I don't, I'm an 87 grad from Carleton. I came back to teach for almost a decade after that. In the intervening years, I've lived abroad in New York, Doha. I currently live in Calgary, and I was just telling Gelsomina that I went back to teach a couple of years ago at University of Calgary, and it was one of the worst experiences of my life. One, I think I was just profoundly spoiled by being educated here and also teaching here and working with like-minded people. I've been searching for that ever since, and I thought I could go and teach at U of C and it'll be great. Well, I got mocked and ridiculed for actually bringing rolls of yellow trace into the classroom, trying to teach these kids, even though they used computers, that they could actually generate ideas directly from their mind through their hands onto paper. And it didn't go very well, shall we say. I might not ever teach again just because they broke my spirit. I'm really happy to be here today, to be back amongst all of you and see the beautiful drawings and see the beautiful people that make this place. so wonderful. But we have to keep on fighting, Mohammed, right? We have to keep pushing. I draw for every client I have right now, whether it's residential, commercial, big building, or door handles. I draw, I sketch first, and I get things passed through quickly because clients love hand drawings and they love sketches and they understand them. So keep going, everyone, just keep drawing, keep teaching people how to draw because it's not lost. It's harder than just sitting down at a computer, but it still works. Thank you.
These days I'm teaching the high-end colonels to be generals by increasing their design capacities, their strategy, etc. And I just love it. I walk into that classroom with 13 colonels. What's that? What's that? This is tracing paper. They're children of the screen, age 40. And they were thrilled to say you can put the map of the South China Sea down, and then you could write on it the interests of the various countries, including China, and then you can sort of see where some of our capabilities and allies are in the next layer, and then you can change that layer. And they went, these are the best and the brightest, they went wild.
Dave, I came here entirely by accident. I was studying arts at St. Patrick's College, and a guy who was in residence with me went, "You should go over to the architecture building, they're all crazy." And so I came over here, and he was right. But what really grabbed me is, like, the list of things. There's politics and environment and energy and space and humanity and culture, and I discovered that in architecture, they study all this stuff, but they've got this ace, and that's they make shit. Making it. Like, I think that's the secret we all have. There are millions of bureaucrats out there. They can manage anything, they can flowchart it, they can do all these things. We're the only ones who can make a thing. And when you make a thing, you take all of those considerations that they've got in their program and their critical path, all of those, and you make a thing about it. And once you make the thing, you don't even have to talk about it anymore because it carries a meaning. And that's a thing that we all share. And I think that's the magic, and I don't think we should tell anybody about it.
I just wish all the people could applaud on that. Eve.
Hi, I'm Yves Gosselin. I'm a graduate from 1973. I find the discussion an interesting dichotomy because I can identify with some of the things that Terry said about, the world's in real big shit, and the concerns having to do with practice and drawing and representation, the beauty of being in the action. And to me, this is in a dichotomy. I'm going to tell a bit of a story, going back to Glenn's introduction. When Doug Shadbolt set up the school, and Doug could be brutally honest, and we were this first class, and I said, 5% of you are going to be good designers. The rest of you, your support cast. Be part of the support. And it's very important for you within that support role to be the best that you can. And my class produced 2 of the top building scientists this country has seen in the last 50 years. We've produced people that have worked in urban design and urban planning. Doug Shadbolt's idea, his concept, going back to what Terry was saying, is he wanted to educate people to be architects and then to place them in government, industry, schools. And the top 5%, fill your boots, become the next Frank Gehry or Norm Foster, be the great designers in private practice. But the other 95% had to get into society and effect change. And unfortunately, within, and I'm guessing here, within 5 years of my graduation, the school had gone back to the most traditional model. Everything is design studio. Everybody has to be a great designer. Everybody has to be in private practice once they finish. And unfortunately, I think that's the model that it continues to be predominant across Canada. I was hoping that the school was going to change when they introduced the 3 streams. But I think first year is not the right decision.
Wow.
Glenn, you gave me an A in a project one time. I think it was about the only one I got, so I thank you for that.
I remember it well.
I hope you spent the money wisely. I spent the last 25 years of my life practicing architecture in a third world country in the Caribbean. And while it sounds like a wonderful experience, and in many ways it was, a lot was expected of an architect in a third world country. It harkens back to the days when architects were master builders, and they had to know a little bit about everything. And I find that in working in contemporary offices, we become so specialized in the different aspects of what we do that we've kind of lost sight that our education should be quite broad. And in that sense, we understand design, we understand technology, we understand finance, we understand planning, we understand people, we know a bit about business. I don't think we should ever lose sight, regardless of what our skills are, that, you know, we're expected to know a lot more. We're expected to be the coordinators of a lot of different talents that come in to putting, especially now buildings being as expansive as they are, both in times and in terms of square footage and cost and so on. And the third world example was one that struck me as we were listening to this. We were talking about contractors and workmen would always come up to me and ask me questions that generally as a practitioner you don't really have to answer, because the electrician is supposed to know this, or the plumber is supposed to know this, or the tile man is supposed to know this, but you were the one that was supposed to know. And so you found yourself doing a lot of research, so in fact you could give an intelligent answer. And to your point about materials, I think that's such a wise comment. Second Pritzker Prize winner was a man by the name of Luis Barragan. I don't know whether he's known here, but he made poetry out of walls and water and so on. But what he did was he understood the materials that he had to work with and the labor forces that were there to implement them. And he was so successful, not partly because of his vision, of course, and his talent, but I think understanding the mediums in which we work, and that's been something that's been expressed by a lot of different architects. Some even prefer to decide on a medium before they actually get into developing form and so on, because it informs the kind of architecture that they can do. But certainly understanding how materials perform and what you're going to be allowed to do with it is important. And that all comes from the third world lesson. Thanks for the A.
That's my mentor, Louis Kahn. Louis Kahn said, "So I say to brick." And he would have a comment. Okay, there's a special guest here. My ex-wife, Charlene. She was a founder of this school. Sidney Shekel and Charlene cooked and were hospitable, infill, really were part of that beginning. Am I right? I've got a picture of Bob Webster pulling my son up a hill, in a sled at our house, because we had dinner together in that first year, every week. Well, what a different environment. Charlene, you've reflected for 50 years on what these kind of people are about. Would you say a word or two?
I only can speak in front of children. Grade 2, 3 is my specialty now. But architecture for me was absolutely wonderful, because it was like being in a kindergarten class, full of what these people were talking about, hands-on and experimenting and not worrying really about what other people were thinking, just finding what they could do and say. So I had a wonderful time in those first years, and I still really identify with her.
Thank you. In the early moments of time, in the early moments of the school, like the first weeks, you know, there were only 2 of us that were involved. Doug was up country fighting for mandated money. So we've got to make amazing decisions like, how'd you like to teach at Carleton? What's that? Or buy all the books? Or buy the machinery for the wood shop. Can you imagine how much fun that was? Or build the furniture. They're up there, there's a, I guess you've all seen these, there's a metal frame, stands about this high tall. It's a rectangular pair of pipe head made of 1-inch material. We built those, had them built for us in the first year, and here they are 50 odd years later. Sound, going well. But one of the things that I sort of threw off was, let's make it 50-50, female and male. And so I'm really thrilled when I walk through the school to see that it's 80-20 female and it's at least 60-40 female male. And so I consider that 50-year project well done. Would you say a word? That's what I asked her for a word and she said, I'm not in architecture. What have you heard tonight?
Well, I'm a sister of an architect, and my dad is also an architect. So I actually study sciences and biology and human kinetics. So growing up with my sister and supporting her has been a job. It's also been an amazing experience to see that perspective, and I totally agree with you, like oscillations, going from general to specific. It's important to kind of be holistic with everyone and get everyone's perspective on things, but it's also important to fight for what you believe in. And I can definitely see that in my sister and father, who really fight for what they believe in, and it kind of translates into my life. And so it helps me kind of pick the battles that I want to fight with and find things that I'm really passionate about and fight on those things. So yeah, it's been awesome.
Okay, we've got a letter from Gulzar. I thought he was trying to get here. And it's incredibly appropriate to the thoughtful making stream. And thank you very much. Oh, by the way, would you all consider Doug Shadbolt's role in more than starting this school, but in setting forth forces? And Joel, I know you're a fan of this building, and it was wonderful to know that you went to Norway to talk to Carmen, etc. So I want to throw an idea out in the most embarrassing way possible, which is typical of me. Could we all consider naming a major part of this building after Doug? Welcome to Shadbolt Hall.
Whatever you whisper, Jim, please do.
You've done such an amazing job, Ben, and we're lucky to have you. We're lucky to have you. I do have a letter from Gulzar. Maybe it fits in now, but I don't want to hold the panel too.
Read it.
So he wrote, he wished he could have been here. I'm deeply touched that the school to which I owe my entire identity as a teacher has, through its characteristic generosity of spirit, allowed my brief message to be read to what I can imagine as a happy gathering of our alumni, our academic vanguard, and the loyal community of supporters. I feel like I've been chosen to be the carrier of some words and memories from distant time, oceans away, and a message from my first alma mater of 8 years to my second academic home of 35 years, this Carleton School of Architecture. These 13 words, especially for the youngest students and scholars among you, quote, "To thy happy children of the future, those of the past send greetings, unquote. The unfolding journey, indeed, the history of this most fascinating place, space, cradle, network of passages, workshops, and scanty places to hide this Carleton School of Architecture is marked by the ideas, the aspirations, the experiments, the restlessness about the hardening of positions, much less the freezing of any ideologies, an occasional confrontation often settled across a few lunar cycles, ephemeral, if any hard feelings, ever new personalities, an occasional messianic intellectual director whose impact would invariably spawn many interpreted versions, novel synthetic phrases, leading to faculty write-ups and students' most unexpected, unabashed, meticulously worked out responses. Carleton has been blessed with directors, teachers, students, visiting critics, technicians, and even the support staff who would not constitute a formal group photo worth showing. And yet I can swear by the goddesses of memory, reflection, foresight, anxieties, and unusual hindsight wisdom that the apparent incongruities in many cases spawn the most fertile of uncharted trajectories. I can say this on the basis of my 13 years of having left for Lahore, an often solitary reflection on the Carleton years in awed wonder, often arriving at most beneficial realizations about the value of those seemingly irresolvable oppositions. I'm deliberately avoiding mentioning many individuals, but I do want to register a few heartfelt confessionals that echo often as recall Carleton. And then there's a series of names, quote, Alberto, I wish you had not left. Gianni, you were right. Tom, you were the best teacher. Phi, you remain the most endearingly enigmatic. Baez, thank you for teaching Omar Hassan at Brisdias. He's my best teaching colleague in Lahore. Lucy, let me know when the dinner is served, and sorry. Mark and Nada, miss you dearly. Yvonne, Janine, Ozair, and Greg, thanks for continuing. You are the pillars. Finally, bless you, Carmen Cornel, Barry Hoban, Moriyama Tashima, and David Ezraeli for your passion for architecture and education, your generosity of spirit, and welcome, Director Stoner, Elzer Hyder.
Thank you and good night.